I've always wanted a slasher-themed season of American Horror Story. Slasher is my favorite horror subgenre, and I can't believe that it took them this long to actually make a full-on slasher team. Sure, Asylum with Bloody Face and Freak Show had Twisty, but those seasons that they were in wasn't just about slasher. And so, I was very excited when 1984 was finally announced. The new intro is very interesting. It very much fits the whole 80s aesthetic of the show, but the only issue that I had with it was that it isn't as creative as the other seasons. One of the most interesting to see when starting a new season of VHS is the intro, and for the most part, this one is very interesting. It's just that it kind of looked like they just put on some random 80s stock footage together and called it an intro. Though of course, it's still very good and has an awesome music that I didn't want to skip at all. And starting this season is an aerobic scene that introduces the main characters of the season, and I think that this is probably one of the best scenes in the entire series. The location, the costumes, the music, the colors, everything about it was all just perfect. The characters are all pretty diverse, and they all have their own backstory as to why they wanted to go to camp. Xavier and Montana being my favorite characters of them all. The change of cast didn't bother me at all. I actually liked all of them. I thought they all did a pretty good job portraying their characters. Though some of the scenes with Chad talking kind of distracts me a bit. It's just that Gus Kentworthy's acting isn't that great at all. Whenever he delivers his lines, it just feels like he's rushing them all, and he barely even have any emotions when delivering them. I remember them announcing that Chad and Brooke were supposed to be a couple, but it just never happened in the actual season. But like at the first episode, it felt like they were trying to build up something, and they made it pretty obvious that Brooke had a crush on him. But then on the same episode, they just replaced Chad with Ray instead. I don't know, it just feels kinda weird. AHS soundtrack is of course always great, and 1984 is not an exception. It introduced me to a lot of great 80s music that I now listen to every time. The first 5 episodes was full of twists and turns that I never expected. Some of the twists were great, but some of them were pretty bad. Margaret being the killer was a pretty obvious twist, though it is the only predictable twist. The others were all completely unexpected. The one twist that I hated the most was probably the whole ghost thing. It is just so bad that it basically ruined the season for me. I feel like they've overdone it way too much. This season was advertised as a slasher, but then as the story progressed it just kind of became a ghost story instead, which was very frustrating. It basically steered away the focus of the season, and somehow this ghost subplot was even worse than the second half of the season. What made Murder House great was that it felt very original, even if the whole story was structured around cliches. But with 1984, the originality is now gone. This is now the 5th time that they've done this ghosting, 6th if you include Coven. It's not as impactful anymore, it's just annoying. The story is basically structured as an opposite Roanoke, where the first half was a very straightforward story and the second half is presented as a regular story. And I really like this idea. Having the first 5 episodes all take place in one night made it very fun to watch, and the 6th episode was like the perfect conclusion to the story. But the thing is, episode 7 to 9 happened. The other half of the season felt like a completely different show entirely. Episode 5's ending gave a lot of promises, but the other half took a different approach. The writing was so bad, the story was rushed, and it is full of retcons. Episode 79 was supposed to be this huge finale of the season, where you'd expect they'd all have this final fight that would finally end the killings, but instead those 3 episodes was wasted on new unnecessary subplots that was never even mentioned before. I don't know how the writers thought it was a good idea to introduce new characters in the ending of the season. Worst thing is, those characters didn't even contribute anything to the story whatsoever. We didn't need to know the origin of the camp and why it became a haunted ground. And we also definitely didn't need Dylan McDermott's character. Yes, of course it was great to have them return for another season, and their acting was great, but their characters were obviously just there to make the remaining episodes longer. Those unnecessary subplots aren't the only problem that the second half suffered. There are also way too many retcons on the second half of the season that it just made it so frustrating to watch. Like, some characters' personality had been completely changed that they could have simply been an entirely different character. The good people are now bad and the bad became good. Margaret's God Obsession trait is now gone. Like, there's so much retcon that I can't even keep track of how many there are. They even retconned Margaret's motives. In the first few episodes of the season, it was hinted that Margaret was already a weird kid. But then when they added this unnecessary subplot about Mr. Jingle's mother, it turns out Margaret was just influenced by her. And I think this pretty much ruined their character. Like, what makes a great killer is if they actually did the murders because they wanted to, and not just because a ghost told them so. And here are more retcons and unresolved subplots that I just can't explain because it doesn't make any sense. There are so many things wrong about the second half that it made me forget that I truly enjoyed the first half of 1984. Look, even if I hated the first subplot about Mr. Jingle's mother, I must say, his ending was very sweet and I like how it's supposed to be a homage to Friday the 13th. But even if it's sweet, it kind of made his build up with Ramirez on episode 6 to 8 pointless because he didn't even participate in the final fight. It was so disappointing. And actually, the entire finale was disappointing. The story structure for the finale was so rushed and lazy at the same time. It's like the apocalypse all over again. We got another time jump, but now it's in the present, and the conclusion for the story was just explained in flashbacks. All of the characters did was just run around the camp without even any kind of choreography. Compare the chase scene here to the scene where Ramirez got attacked in episode 6. There was no effort whatsoever. It feels like they just told the actors to just run around and stab Ramirez because that's literally what it looked like. Even if Ramirez's death in the finale was kind of pretty satisfying, it is just problematic. Well, first, the CGI blood. I feel like it completely ruined the scene. It was just so distracting. Especially since literally on the same scene where he got his throat slashed, some great practical blood came out of it, and it looked pretty good. So I don't know why they chose to add a cheap CGI blood. Also, why is Ramirez even on camp in 2019 if he was supposed to be a ghost on hotel, which took place in 2015? If Ramirez was on the camp for 30 years, then who was the person that appeared in hotel? Yet again, another proof that the writers just completely gave up on the second half of the season. There are so many ways to implement this, but somehow the writers chose the dumbest way of them all. It is such a huge plot hole that the writers didn't even try to explain or acknowledge it. I hate every single thing about the finale. The whole idea of the second half was to have this huge party, and every survivor and the dead victims from 1984 massacre will return to camp to finish it all. And it's a party, so you might think that they would probably give us another massacre. But then almost none of those happened. This season only had 9 episodes, unlike the other past seasons where they had 13 or 10 episodes. And in a way, I kind of get why they only had 9. Since the final 3 episodes feels like it was just there to actually pan out the season. It was very obvious that by the time episode 7 came that they just ran out of ideas, but had to still keep going because they can't just end the season with only 5 episodes. I know, I keep talking about the final 3 episodes a lot, but it's because it is just so bad. It's like they didn't even try. AHS now has 3 bad seasons in a row. 4 if you think Roanoke was bad. At this point, it just feels like these new seasons are now just a parody rather than a proper AHS season. If they keep this up, I'm not sure I'll be able to keep up with the series anymore. Of course, I still recommend this season even if the whole second half was a never-ending disappointment. It's a very fun season with great characters and full of unpredictable twists. Just don't expect it to be just as good as the first 4 seasons of American Horror Story. And also, try to avoid the second half if you could.